Inside Alcatraz, complete crime documentary. The walls that never forget. Before we even begin, smash that subscribe button like a prison cell door slamming shut, drop a comment if you think you could survive a night inside, and hit the like button to prove you'd make it out alive. Trust me, after this story you'll never see Alcatraz the same way again. Fog rolled heavy over San Francisco Bay, swallowing the horizon and muffling the sound of distant waves. The black silhouette of Alcatraz Island jutted from the water like a jagged tooth, crowned with its fortress of stone, steel, and razor wire. For decades, the rock had been called escape-proof. A place where America sent the men it could not control anywhere else. Mob bosses, murderers, escapists, the criminal elite if you could call them that. But on a cold March night in 1962, Alcatraz became more than just a prison. It became the stage for one of the most baffling and dangerous mysteries in American crime history. This wasn't about Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, the infamous escape that still haunts history books. This story was darker, buried in sealed files and whispered testimonies. A story about corruption, betrayal, and a missing man whose name never made the headlines. His name was Daniel Monroe. The disappearance. Officer Daniel Monroe was not new to the Rock. At 38 years old, he had survived the Marines, 2 tours in Korea, and nearly a decade walking the most dangerous cell blocks in the United States. Colleagues described him as hard but fair. Prisoners called him Iron Hand. On March 14, 1962, Monroe reported for his night shift. According to the duty log, he began rounds in D Block at 11:30 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. At 11:47 p.m., his radio was discovered lying on the ground near cell 13. Its cord had been cut. Nearby, a streak of blood smeared across the wall. By midnight, the prison was in full lockdown. Guards swept every tier, dragging prisoners from their bunks, tearing apart mattresses, shining flashlights into shadows. The sound of clanging doors echoed like thunder. But Monroe was gone, swallowed whole by the prison itself. The investigation begins. At dawn, a ferry carried federal agents across the bay. The FBI did not take disappearances lightly, especially not on Alcatraz. Leading the investigation was Special Agent Caroline Vega, a profiler with a reputation for cracking impossible cases. The moment she stepped onto the island, Vega sensed the weight of history pressing down. Alcatraz wasn't just concrete and bars, it was a living beast, pulsing with resentment, secrets, and violence. She started with the basics. Who had motive? Who hated Monroe enough to take him? The answer was simple: almost everyone. Monroe was known for his discipline. He wrote up infractions that other guards ignored. He broke up smuggling rings, punished gang leaders, and had no tolerance for bribery or contraband. Among the inmates he was feared more than respected. Among the guards he was resented. Vega's first clue came not from a prisoner, but from Monroe's own office. Hidden beneath a drawer was a ledger, meticulous notes in Monroe's tight handwriting. Inside were dates, times, and names. Inmate movements. Suspicious packages offloaded from supply boats. Conversations overheard in the yard. And one cryptic entry written the night before he vanished. The rock cracks from the inside. Suspect 1, Vincent Viper Carrillo. If Alcatraz had a devil, his name was Vincent Carrillo. Nicknamed Viper on the streets of Los Angeles, he was a killer, extortionist, and gang boss. Carrillo had run rackets in 3 states before landing on the Rock for a double homicide tied to a botched drug deal. Monroe and Carrillo despised each other. Monroe had thrown Carrillo into solitary more than once, breaking up his control of contraband. When Vega stood outside Carrillo's cell, he greeted her with a grin that showed more menace than charm. "Funny thing," Carrillo said, leaning against the bars, "how a man just disappears on this island. Thought this place was escape-proof." "Did you take him?" Vega asked coldly. Carrillo laughed, a low, rasping sound. "Lady, if I did, you think I'd leave blood in the hall? Nah, this ain't me. Someone's playing games. And trust me, they're better at it than I am." He was taunting but not lying. Something in his eyes told Vega he knew more. But he wasn't ready to share it. The contraband cache. Days later, the case took a dangerous turn. In the prison laundry room, behind a rusted vent, investigators uncovered a stash. Homemade knives, cigarettes, and a revolver, a .38 caliber handgun with its serial number filed off. How did a gun make it onto Alcatraz? Vega's stomach turned. There was only one explanation. It had been smuggled in by a guard. Fingerprints lifted from the gun matched Officer Leonard Briggs, a 22-year veteran of the Rock. When confronted, Briggs denied everything. He claimed Monroe had planted evidence against corrupt staff before, and now someone was trying to pin it on him. But his alibi didn't hold. On the night Monroe vanished, Briggs' patrol log showed a 20-minute gap. Exactly the window when Monroe disappeared. The note. Just as Vega was preparing to arrest Briggs, Warden Holt stormed into the room, clutching a piece of paper. His hands shook as he handed it to her. It was a note, scrawled in jagged handwriting. Monroe dies at midnight. The time stamp on the bottom read 11 p.m., 1 hour from when the note was discovered. The prison went into chaos. Guards stormed cell blocks, dragging men into lineups. The clock was ticking, and Vega could feel the weight of every second. If Monroe was alive, this was the last chance to save him. But as the search swept deeper into the rock, they stumbled across something no one expected. A hidden passage. Behind a rusted boiler in the basement, workers found an old utility shaft. The air smelled of mildew and rot. Inside were boot prints, fresh and smeared in blood. The trail led downward into darkness. And when Vega's flashlight pierced the shadows, she saw something that froze her blood. Monroe's uniform jacket, torn, bloody, and abandoned. But there was no body. Only a smear of words written on the wall in crimson streaks. The game has begun. The utility shaft stank of mildew and damp iron, a tomb buried beneath the prison. Agent Vega crouched low, her flashlight beam cutting through layers of dust and cobwebs. The walls were streaked with grime, but the smear of blood, fresh, tacky, unmistakable, led deeper. The words scrawled in crimson, "The game has begun," were not random. They were deliberate. The handwriting was jagged but not chaotic. Someone had taken time to press each stroke into the stone. It wasn't a prisoner's frantic plea. It was a statement. Vega's instincts screamed, this wasn't just about a missing officer. This was about power. Behind her, Warden Holt shifted uncomfortably. He was a large man, broad in the shoulders, but his eyes betrayed unease. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. "We've had escapes, stabbings, riots, but never this." Vega didn't answer. She touched the blood with her gloved finger. Still wet. Monroe had been here less than an hour ago, which meant he might still be alive. The secret ledger. The search moved fast. Vega ordered every passage mapped, every tunnel marked. Alcatraz was riddled with old shafts, left over from its military days. Most were sealed decades ago. But if someone had reopened them, they'd created an entire underworld beneath the rock. Back in Monroe's office, Vega spread his ledger across the desk. The neat handwriting gave way to frantic scrawls in the last week of entries. March 10th. Noticed extra packages on dock, contents unclear. March 12th. Briggs absent from tier patrol, unusual. March 13th. Viper, Carrillo speaking with O'Malley after lights out. Possible coded exchange. March 14th. Rock cracks from the inside. Tucked between pages was something stranger. A coded map, rough outlines of the prison with X's marked in forgotten corners. Laundry, boiler room, storage tunnels. Monroe had been investigating something, and it wasn't just inmates smuggling cigarettes. Vega studied the marks carefully. The X under boiler room matched the shaft where they found the bloody jacket. He had known. Monroe had been on to them. Suspect 2, Officer Leonard Briggs. Briggs was brought into the interrogation room again. The revolver with his fingerprints was placed on the table. Vega's voice was calm, steady, but her eyes drilled into him. You knew Monroe was onto something. What was it? Briggs shook his head, sweat dripping down his temple. I don't know what you're talking about. You signed out of patrol the same time Monroe vanished. You want to explain that? I wasn't where I was supposed to be, that's true. But I didn't touch him. Vega leaned closer. Then why did we find your prints on a gun smuggled into the rock? Briggs' jaw trembled. He glanced at Holt, then back to Vega. Because it's not what you think. It wasn't for me. It was for them. Them who? Vega pressed. Briggs hesitated, then whispered, the circle. The room fell silent. The circle? Holt barked. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Briggs shook his head violently. I've already said too much. If they know I talked, I'm as good as dead. He clammed up, refusing to say another word. Prisoner testimony. If Briggs wouldn't talk, maybe the inmates would. Vega pulled records of every prisoner Monroe had punished in the last 6 months. Names like Vincent Carrillo, Robert Red Malone, and Gerald O'Malley filled the list. She started with O'Malley. O'Malley was Irish, in his 40s, serving life for armed robbery turned deadly. He was wiry, sharp-eyed, with the demeanor of a man who always calculated 3 moves ahead. When Vega sat across from him in the visitation room, he smiled faintly. "I hear you're looking for your missing guard," O'Malley said, voice thick with an accent. Vega stayed quiet, letting him talk. "He wasn't a bad one, Monroe. Fair, I'll give him that. But fair don't keep you alive in here." He stuck his nose where it didn't belong. He started peeling back layers, and once you do that on the rock, you don't like what you find. "What did he find?" Vega asked. O'Malley leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "The Circle. A brotherhood stronger than bars, stronger than walls. Guards, cons, doesn't matter. They've been running things under your noses for years. And Monroe?" He was about to tear it open. "And where is he now?" Vega pressed. O'Malley smirked. "If I tell you, I'm a dead man. If I don't, maybe I live another day. So, Agent, what's my incentive?" Vega's jaw tightened. She stood, sliding the chair back with a screech. "Your incentive is surviving the night. Because if Monroe's body turns up, this whole island burns. And I promise you'll be the first name I feed to the fire." For the first time, O'Malley's smirk faltered. Midnight. The note had said, "Monroe dies at midnight." The clock ticked closer. Guards and agents swept every corner, every shaft, every storage closet. The rock groaned with the sound of boots, the slam of doors, the shouts of orders. Then, just before midnight, a scream echoed through the halls. It came from D Block. Guards rushed to the source. Inmate Robert Malone, red, was thrashing in his cell, clawing at the bars, his face pale as death. Blood soaked his mattress. Across his chest, carved into the flesh with something sharp, were 4 letters. CIRC. The unfinished word hung in the air like smoke. Circle. Malone gasped, choking on his own breath, and managed to whisper 2 final words before collapsing. "Boiler, room, the descent." Vega led the charge. Flashlights cut through the black as they descended into the underbelly of the rock. The boiler room loomed like a furnace from hell, pipes hissing, valves dripping. The air was thick, metallic. And there, chained to a rusted beam, was Monroe. Alive. Barely. His face was swollen, his uniform shredded, blood dripping from cuts along his arms. His mouth was gagged, but his eyes blazed with desperate fury. Guards rushed forward, unlocking chains, cutting restraints. Monroe collapsed into their arms, coughing, trembling. When Vega tore the gag away, his first words were hoarse but clear. "They're not done, it's only starting." And in his bloodied hand, he clutched a folded scrap of paper. Vega opened it carefully. It was another note. "The Circle controls the rock. Next target, Holt." The warden's face drained of color. And for the first time in his career, he looked afraid. Monroe's rescue should have ended the nightmare, but it only deepened it. He was alive, yes, but barely clinging to consciousness. His words, broken by coughing, sent a chill through every man in that boiler room. They're inside," he rasped. "Not just cons, guards too. The Circle runs everything." Vega crouched beside him. "Who, Monroe? Who's in it?" His eyes flickered to Holt. For a moment, the room froze. The warden stiffened, shifting his weight as if bracing against a silent accusation. But before Monroe could say more, his body convulsed in pain. His head slumped. He was alive, but he wouldn't last long. They carried him to the infirmary, guards scrambling, boots hammering on steel. Vega stayed behind. She scanned the boiler room, her flashlight beam catching something scratched into the metal beam where Monroe had been chained. At first it looked like random gouges, but then the letters came into focus. "Circle owns all." Her stomach nodded. Whoever had orchestrated this wasn't just flexing power. They were declaring war. The second ledger. Later that night, Vega returned to Monroe's office. Something nagged at her, his ledger, the cryptic map, the missing pages. She tore through drawers, checked vents, pulled at floorboards. Nothing. Until her hand brushed against the underside of his desk. Taped there was a second notebook, smaller, bound with twine. Unlike the first, this one wasn't neat. It was frantic. Inside were names. Not just prisoners. Guards. Briggs. O'Connor. Lewis. Even administrative staff. Each name circled in red ink with notes like, "Met with Carrillo after lights out." "On dock during unauthorized delivery." "Paid off by Malone's crew." And at the bottom of the final page, one name stood alone. Written in large, desperate strokes, underlined twice. Holt. The warden. The warden's past. By dawn, Vega's suspicions had shifted. She had seen Holt's reaction when the note threatened his life. Shock, yes, but not surprise. It was the face of a man who already knew he was in the crosshairs. She began digging into his history. Military background. A decorated career. Appointed warden of Alcatraz in 1958 after serving in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. But buried in archived reports were whispers of misconduct, unreported contraband, allegations of payoffs, inmates mysteriously silenced before they could testify. It painted a picture Vega didn't want to believe. If Holt was part of this circle, or worse, leading it, then Monroe's disappearance wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a purge. But why keep Monroe alive? The answer came at 9 a.m., when guards discovered something stuffed beneath the bars of cell 23. It was a photograph. A grainy black and white shot of Monroe in chains, his face bloodied. Scrawled across the top in ink were the words, "One of us, or one of none." Breaking point. The message was clear. The circle wasn't trying to kill Monroe, they were trying to recruit him. Force him to bend. If he broke, he'd become their pawn inside the guard ranks. If he refused, his body would be found floating in the bay. Vega slammed the photo onto Holt's desk. "This ends now. You've got traitors in your staff, maybe worse. If you're hiding something." "I've given my life to this place," Holt snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of fury and fear. "You think I'd let a gang of cutthroats run my prison?" Vega's eyes narrowed. "It's not just cutthroats. It's guards. It's your people. And unless you come clean, I'll tear this place apart brick by brick to find them." Holt's silence was deafening. That evening, as the island sank into fog once again, Vega prepared her next move. She would interrogate Briggs again, press Carrillo harder, and dig deeper into Holt's past. But then came the sound. The siren. Blasting through the night, it sent guards running, inmates screaming, and the prison spiraling into chaos. Vega bolted down the corridor, her heart pounding. She reached the yard just as searchlights cut across the concrete. Dozens of inmates were pressed against the fences, howling like wolves. Guards shouted, rifles raised. And there, in the middle of the yard, illuminated in stark white beams, was a figure hanging from the basketball hoop. A guard's body. His throat cut. Pinned to his chest was a note, written in the same jagged hand as before. "The circle makes its move." The dead man's face twisted in the harsh light, and Vega staggered back when she recognized him. It was Officer Briggs. The one man who had started to crack. The one who had whispered the circle's name. Now he was silenced, forever. And for Vega, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The circle wasn't just real. It was everywhere. The circle tightens. The siren still wailed when Vega stepped into the yard, its mechanical shriek cutting through the fog like a blade. Searchlights crisscrossed the concrete, illuminating the chaos below. Inmates pressed against their cell windows, screaming and pounding metal fists against steel bars. Guards shouted over one another, their rifles raised, but no one fired. At the center of it all, Officer Briggs' body swung gently from the basketball hoop. His throat was cut, his uniform soaked through with blood. Pinned to his chest was the note that confirmed what Vega already feared. The circle makes its move. Vega forced herself forward, boots crunching on broken glass and loose gravel. She stared up at Briggs' lifeless face, pale in the searchlight. Only hours ago, he had sat in an interrogation room, sweating under her questions, whispering the circle's name like a confession. Now his voice was silenced forever. This was no random act of violence. This was a message, a declaration. The circle was done hiding. The lockdown. Warden Holt barked orders with a booming voice, but Vega noticed the tremor in it. "Lock every block. Strip search every cell. Nobody moves without my order." Guards scrambled, dragging prisoners from the yard, shouting over the chorus of jeers and laughter. Some inmates howled with glee, like predators who smelled blood in the air. Others shrank back, their faces tight with fear. Vega stood motionless, her eyes scanning the scene. The circle wasn't just killing. They were performing. They had hung Briggs' body like a warning flag, ensuring every man in Alcatraz, guard and prisoner alike, understood exactly who held the power now. And Vega knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The infirmary. Monroe stirred awake in the infirmary hours later. His face was a mask of bruises, his voice hoarse, but his willpower burned through the pain. When Vega entered, he tried to sit up, wincing. "You shouldn't be moving," Vega said, pulling a chair close. "I can't lie down while that thing spreads," Monroe rasped. His eyes locked on hers. "They killed Briggs, didn't they?" Vega didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. "I warned him," Monroe whispered. "I told him once you say the circle's name out loud, you're marked. They don't forgive. They don't forget." "Then help me," Vega said. "If we're going to stop them, I need names." "Who's in it? Guards? Prisoners?" Monroe shook his head weakly. It's not that simple. It's not just a gang, Agent Vega. It's a covenant. Everyone owes someone, and once you're in, you're chained tighter than the walls themselves. The circle isn't run by one man, it's run by fear. Fear can be broken, Vega countered. Monroe's lips twisted into something between a grimace and a smile. Not here. Not on the rock. The second death. By dawn, the circle struck again. This time it wasn't a guard. It was an inmate. Gerald O'Malley, the same man who had smirked at Vega in interrogation, was found slumped against his cell wall, eyes wide, mouth frozen in a silent scream. A crude shiv protruded from his chest. But it wasn't the weapon that made Vega's blood run cold. It was what was carved into the wall behind his body. Snitches sink. O'Malley had talked. He had hinted at the circle's power. And now he was dead. Vega's fury boiled. Whoever the circle was, they weren't just covering their tracks. They were accelerating. Removing loose ends, consolidating control, silencing anyone who dared whisper against them. She turned to Holt, her patience gone. We can't run this like a prison anymore. This is a war zone. If you want to save your staff, your inmates, your island, you let me do it my way. Holt glared at her, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, the warden of Alcatraz wasn't in control. And Vega knew it. The prisoner hierarchy. To fight the circle, Vega needed allies. And the only people who could give her the truth were the same ones who lived under its shadow, the inmates. She started with Carrillo, the Viper. When she entered his cell, he was sitting cross-legged, tattoos snaking up his arms, eyes glittering in the dim light. Back so soon? He said with a smirk. Cut the games, Vega snapped. Briggs is dead. O'Malley is dead. You're next if you don't start talking. Carrillo laughed, low and dark. You think the circle cares about me? I am the circle, lady. But even I know when not to play with fire. What do they want? Vega pressed. Carrillo leaned forward, lowering his voice. Power. Always power. The Rock is a kingdom and kingdoms have rulers. Guards smuggle, cons pay. The circle keeps the books balanced. But Monroe? He started poking holes. And when the walls crack, everyone drowns. Who's at the top? Vega demanded. Carrillo's grin widened. That's the beauty of it. You'll never know. One day it's a guard. One day it's an inmate. Maybe one day, it's you. The threat. That night, Vega returned to her temporary quarters inside the administration building. The air felt heavy, suffocating. She locked the door behind her, sat at the desk, and began sifting through Monroe's second ledger again. Names. Dates. Notes. And that one damning word at the bottom. Holt. She didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. The light flickered. A shadow moved across the wall. Vega spun, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver holstered at her side. But the room was empty. Then she saw it. A note slid under her door. She picked it up, her pulse hammering in her throat. Scrawled in the same jagged handwriting she had seen before were 6 words. You're on the list now. Her blood ran cold. The circle wasn't just killing guards. Now they were coming for her. Vega stared at the note, her knuckles white as she gripped the paper. 6 words written in jagged strokes. You're on the list now. She had dealt with killers before. Men who butchered strangers for money, rage, or pleasure. But this was different. This was organized. Calculated. The circle didn't lash out. They built fear like a scaffold, piece by piece, until the whole structure came crashing down on their victims. And now the structure was being built around her. She folded the note, slid it into her pocket, and forced her breathing to slow. She could not show fear, not here. Not on the Rock. Divided loyalties. The next morning, Vega gathered the senior guards in the mess hall. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with suspicion. Men who had worked side by side for years now eyed one another like potential traitors. Let's be clear, Vega said, her voice sharp. The circle is not just inmates. It's staff. Briggs' prints on that gun weren't an accident. Monroe's ledger has names. Some of you are clean. Some of you aren't. But I promise you this, I will find out who's who. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some guards bristled with anger, others looked away, ashamed or afraid. Holt sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. One guard, Officer Daniels, slammed his fist on the table. With all due respect, Agent Vega, we've been running this prison for decades. You come in here, waving your badge, pointing fingers? What makes you think you can fix something we've lived with since the first day this place opened? Because unlike you, Vega snapped, I'm not afraid of the circle. The room went silent. She let her words hang, then turned on her heel and walked out, her boots echoing like gunshots. Behind her she could feel their eyes, some full of hate, others full of fear. And she knew she had just made enemies on both sides of the bars. The prison riot. It started with whispers in the yard. Then shouts. Then the sound of fists slamming against metal. By noon, Alcatraz was in chaos. A fight erupted between two rival groups, one loyal to Carrillo, the other to a younger inmate named Darius Dare Washington, a rising figure with ties to smuggling operations. Knives flashed, blood sprayed across the concrete, and guards waited in swinging batons. Vega stood on the catwalk above, her eyes narrowing. This wasn't a random brawl. It was staged. The circle was testing the waters, forcing the prison into chaos, watching how fast the guards broke, how much Vega could handle before the island slipped beyond her control. By the time order was restored, 3 inmates were dead, 4 guards injured. And on the wall of the yard, scratched with a piece of sharpened metal, were the words, "We decide who lives." Monroe's revelation. That night, Vega returned to Monroe in the infirmary. He was pale, weak, but his mind was sharp, burning with urgency. "They're accelerating," Vega said. "Briggs, O'Malley, the riot, they're moving faster." "Why?" Monroe's voice was little more than a whisper. "Because they know you're close. You found the ledger. You know Holt's name was in it. That's why they're flushing the board. Cleaning house." Vega hesitated. "Monroe, did Holt know? Was he part of it?" Monroe's eyes flickered with something she couldn't read. "Pain, guilt, fear. All I know is this. Holt isn't who he pretends to be. He's kept this prison together for years, but not by law. By deals. By silence. If the circle exists, he didn't stop it. He fed it." Vega felt her stomach turn. The man who swore he'd spent his life holding Alcatraz together might have been the one tightening the noose around it. The escape plot. 2 nights later, Vega was awoken by the blare of another siren. This time it wasn't a murder. It was an escape attempt. 3 inmates, Washington among them, were caught near the laundry block with makeshift rafts fashioned from raincoats. They had pried open a maintenance grate, leading toward the shoreline. But this wasn't like the famous escape of Frank Morris. This wasn't ingenuity. This was chaos, reckless and doomed from the start. Vega realized instantly what it was. A diversion. While guards swarmed the shoreline, someone else was moving inside. She sprinted back toward the administration wing, her instincts screaming. The hallways echoed with distant shouts and pounding boots. And then she smelled it, smoke. Her heart sank. The records office was on fire. Burning the evidence. Flames licked the walls, devouring paper, ink, history. Decades of files, logs, disciplinary records, all turning to ash. Vega and 2 guards kicked down the door, choking on smoke as they dragged out boxes. But it was too late. The core of the archive was gone. And on the wall, blackened by soot, was another message scrawled in ash. "We erase what we want." Vega staggered out, coughing, fury burning in her chest. This wasn't just about killing. The circle was rewriting history. Destroying every piece of evidence that could expose them. And with every page that turned to ash, Vega's time was running out. The cliff before the fall. Later that night, she confronted Holt. She slammed Monroe's second ledger onto his desk, her voice sharp. "Your name's in here. Your guards' names. And now the records are ash. How deep are you in this, Warden?" Holt's face darkened. "Careful, Agent Vega. You don't know what you're accusing me of." "I know enough. You've been making deals with devils to keep this island from burning. But guess what? It's burning anyway. And if you don't start talking, you're going down with it." For the first time, Holt leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "You think you understand Alcatraz? You don't. The circle isn't some gang you can tear down. It's the spine of this prison. Break it and the whole rock collapses. Every guard, every inmate, every life on this island drowns in blood." Vega's eyes narrowed. "Then let it collapse. Because I'd rather drown in blood than bow to them." The words hung heavy. And in that silence, Holt finally exhaled, whispering something that sent a chill down Vega's spine. "You don't get it. The circle isn't inside Alcatraz. Alcatraz is inside the circle." The words rattled in Vega's skull long after Holt spoke them. The circle isn't inside Alcatraz. Alcatraz is inside the circle. It wasn't just a prison conspiracy. It was larger, older, deeper than she had imagined. And Holt's haunted eyes told her he wasn't exaggerating. But she didn't have time to unravel riddles. Because Alcatraz was slipping into full collapse. The fear spreads. By dawn, rumors flooded the cell blocks. Inmates whispered that the circle was untouchable. Guards traded nervous glances, unsure of who stood on which side. Even the ferry crew, men who barely set foot on the island, carried gossip back to the mainland. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison anymore. It was a war zone. When Vega walked the corridors, she could feel it, eyes following her, not just with curiosity but calculation. Every inmate, every guard weighing the odds. Would the FBI agent survive? Or would the circle swallow her whole? The informant. Desperation forced Vega into a dangerous gamble. If she couldn't find loyalty among guards, she'd turn to prisoners. Late that night, she slipped into the segregation wing, past the shadows of barred doors, until she reached cell 7. Inside was Marcus Kane, a wiry man with sunken cheeks and sharp eyes. He'd been caught smuggling heroin through dock shipments 2 years prior, but more importantly, he had once been Carrillo's lieutenant. "Kane," Vega said softly. He raised his hat, studying her. "Bold of you walking in here alone." "I don't have time for games," she replied. "I need information on the circle. You've run with Carrillo. You've seen things. Tell me and I can make your life easier." Kane chuckled. "You think comfort matters to me now? You think a mattress and an extra meal buys my tongue? Then what does?" Vega pressed. His eyes glinted. "Survival." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Carrillo runs one branch. But the circle's not his. He answers upward. There's a council. Not just inmates. Guards, dock workers, even men outside the rock. Every shipment that comes in, every deal struck, every ounce of contraband, it's all logged in a book. They call it the ledger of the circle. And if you find it, you'll burn them all." "Where?" Vega demanded. Kane's smile faded. "That's the problem. Only one man knows where it's kept." "Who?" Kane's eyes flicked to the far end of the tier, where shadows clung to cell 1. "Carrillo. The booby trap." Vega knew it wouldn't be simple. Carrillo wasn't just an inmate, he was the king of whispers, the snake who thrived in the cracks of fear. If he held the secret of the circle's ledger, he was more dangerous than anyone realized. She confronted him the next day, flanked by 2 armed guards. Carrillo was waiting, sitting casually on his bunk, tattoos twisting across his skin like serpents. "Back again?" he drawled. "Careful, agent. Keep visiting me like this and people will start talking." "Where's the ledger?" Vega demanded. Carrillo grinned, slow and wicked. So Kane opened his mouth. "Figures." He was always too ambitious for his own good. "Answer me." Carrillo leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "The ledger's not a book, lady. It's a weapon. And if you find it, you won't control it, you'll die holding it. The circle doesn't lose." Vega slammed her hand against the bars. "You're already losing. Briggs is dead. O'Malley's dead. How long before it's you?" Carrillo only laughed. "You don't get it. Their deaths weren't losses. They were moves." And then he whispered, "Check the chapel." The word sent ice down Vega's spine. The chapel. The prison chapel was one of the few places that still felt untouched by corruption. Rows of wooden pews, a cracked altar, dust motes swirling in weak light. Guards rarely searched it. Religion was the one thing they didn't tamper with, which made it the perfect hiding place. Vega moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping across peeling paint and warped floorboards. She tapped the wood, listening for hollow echoes. Finally, beneath the 3rd pew from the front, she heard it, a hollow thud. She pried up the plank. Inside was a tin box, rusted but intact. Her pulse quickened as she pulled it free and snapped the lock. Inside were stacks of papers, lists of names, coded notes, numbers tied to shipments and more. But one page made her blood run cold. It was a roster. A list of guards and inmates marked with symbols. Some circled, some crossed out. Next to Briggs' name was a black cross. Next to O'Malley's, another. And next to hers, Caroline Vega, was a circle. A perfect circle drawn in red ink. Betrayal. Before she could process it, the chapel doors slammed. Vega spun, her revolver raised. Warden Holt stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. But their rifles weren't pointed at inmates. They were pointed at her. "Put it down, agent," Holt said, his voice low, steady. "You weren't supposed to find that." Vega's heart pounded. "It's true then. You're in it." Holt's expression was grim. "I tried to keep this island afloat. Deals had to be made. Without the circle, Alcatraz would have collapsed years ago. You think this place runs on discipline? No. It runs on balance. And you just tipped the scales. You're protecting murderers?" Vega snapped. "You let them kill Briggs O'Malley?" Holt cut her off. "They broke the rules. The circle has order. Without it, this prison burns. The guard stepped closer, rifle steady. And Holt whispered the words that sealed Chapter 2's end. "You've seen too much. Now you don't leave the rock alive." The chapel smelled of mildew and candle wax, a place meant for redemption now turned into a trap. Vega stood frozen, revolver raised, the tin box of the circle's ledger clutched in her other hand. Warden Holt's eyes were cold, unblinking. Behind him, 2 guards stood like statues, rifles aimed directly at her chest. "You've seen too much," Holt said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "This place survives because of the circle. And the circle survives because men like me protect it. You're not walking off this island alive." Vega's pulse thundered in her ears, but her voice stayed steady. "You call this survival? You've turned Alcatraz into a slaughterhouse. Guards hanging from hoops, inmates stabbed in their cells, records burned, men silenced. That's not survival, Holt. That's rot." Holt's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. This prison has always been about control. The circle gave us that. Without it, the rock falls apart. You take away the circle and chaos spills into every block. You'll have open war in days." "Then let it burn," Vega hissed. For a moment the room went deathly still. And then Holt gave the order. "Do it." The guards raised their rifles. Vega dove. The escape. The crack of gunfire split the chapel air, echoing against stone walls. Vega rolled behind a pew, splinters flying as bullets chewed the wood apart. Her revolver barked twice. One guard screamed and collapsed, blood spraying across the altar. The other hesitated, his aim faltering. Vega lunged forward, slamming the tin box into his face, knocking the rifle away. The man crumpled. Holt cursed, reaching for his own weapon, but Vega's revolver snapped up first. "Don't," she said, her voice low and deadly. Holt froze. For the first time, real fear flickered across his eyes. But Vega didn't fire. Not yet. She backed toward the door, the ledger still in her grip. Holt's voice chased her as she slipped into the hallway. "You can't stop it, Vega. The circle owns the rock." The inmate uprising. Word spread fast. By nightfall, the prison was shaking. The death of Briggs, the stabbing of O'Malley, the escape attempt, the fire. Now whispers of Vega's standoff with Holt swept through the cell blocks like wildfire. The circle had overplayed its hand. Inmates who had once feared it now sensed weakness. Others saw opportunity. By midnight the rock erupted. Doors rattled as inmates rioted, fists pounding bars, shivs flashing under the weak glow of emergency lights. Guards scrambled, torn between quelling the chaos and deciding who they could still trust. Fires broke out in the kitchen and laundry block. Sirens screamed, drowning out the roar of violence. Vega moved through it like a soldier in a war zone. She carried the ledger strapped inside her jacket, her revolver steady in her hand. Every corridor felt like an ambush waiting to spring. Every face she passed could be circle or not. The rock was tearing itself apart. Monroe's last stand. She found Monroe in the infirmary, still pale and weak but stubbornly alive. He sat upright, his eyes blazing as the sounds of the riot echoed through the walls. "They've lost control," Vega said, her voice sharp. "This is our chance. I have the ledger. If we get it off the island." Monroe cut her off with a bitter laugh. "You don't get it, do you? That ledger isn't salvation. It's a death sentence. Every name in there, guards, inmates, dockmen. If you expose them, they'll burn this place down before they let it reach the mainland." "Then help me," Vega snapped. "If you want this place to mean anything, help me get it out." Monroe looked at her for a long moment, then nodded weakly. "The dock. Midnight Ferry. It's your only shot. The betrayal in the yard. They never made it." As Vega and Monroe pushed through the chaos of the yard, the circle struck again. From the shadows, Carrillo stepped forward, flanked by a dozen inmates. Knives glinted in the searchlight. "Well," Carrillo sneered. "The Lady Fed and the Marine Ghost. I told you, Vega, you don't win against the circle. You just bleed slower." Monroe braced himself, his body trembling but defiant. "You'll never win, Carrillo. This place isn't yours." Carrillo laughed. "You're wrong, old man. This place has always been ours." Holt was just smart enough to admit it. And then his knife slashed across the air. Monroe staggered. Blood bloomed across his chest. He fell into Vega's arms, his eyes wide with pain. "Run," he gasped, his voice breaking. "Don't let them." His words cut off as his body went limp. Vega froze, fury and grief colliding in her chest. Carrillo's grin widened. "Now it's just you and me, Agent." The yard was chaos incarnate. Fires crackled along the fence line, smoke choking the air, the clang of steel against steel echoing as inmates battled one another in the shadows. But for Vega, time slowed to a crawl. Monroe's blood spread warm across her arms, his last words, "Run," still burning in her ears. His chest rose once, shuddered, then stilled. Carrillo stood only feet away, the knife gleaming in his hand, his teeth bared in a wolfish grin. Around him, his followers fanned out, circling her like predators closing on prey. Vega lowered Monroe gently to the ground, then rose to her feet, revolver steady in her grip. Her voice was low, dangerous. "You should have finished me when you had the chance." Carrillo's laughter carried over the din of the riot. "Oh no. Killing you quick? That'd be too easy. The circle wants you broken. They want you begging." He tilted his head, eyes glittering. "But me? I want to watch you bleed on this concrete, same as every other fool who thought they could beat the rock." Vega's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot cracked like thunder. One of Carrillo's men dropped, clutching his chest. Panic rippled through the circle. Vega pivoted, fired again, another man collapsing with a scream. Then the swarm surged. The fight for the yard. They came at her in waves, knives flashing, fists swinging. Vega moved on instinct, ducking, weaving, firing until her revolver clicked empty. She swung it like a club, the steel crunching into a jaw, dropping another man to the dirt. But there were too many. Hands grabbed her jacket, pulling her down. A knife sliced across her arm, hot pain searing through flesh. She gritted her teeth, driving her elbow into her attacker's throat, ripping free. Carrillo advanced through the chaos, calm and deliberate, like a serpent gliding through tall grass. "You can't stop it, Vega. The circle doesn't die. It multiplies." She stumbled backward, heart hammering. Her revolver empty, blood dripping down her arm, she reached into her jacket, her fingers brushing the tin box. The ledger. Her last weapon. She yanked it free and held it high. "You want this? Then come and take it." Every eye in the yard locked onto the box. Even Carrillo's smirk faltered for the briefest second. And that was when Vega hurled it into the fire. The ledger burns. The box cracked open as it struck the flames, papers spilling into the inferno. Names, numbers, codes, years of the circle's secrets curling into ash before their eyes. "No!" Carrillo roared, lunging forward, but the fire consumed faster than he could move. His empire, his leverage, his proof of power, gone in seconds. Vega staggered back, clutching her bleeding arm, her voice hoarse but defiant. "You don't own this prison anymore.